If you want, I could just do everything all morning long, but it's nice to have some variety and participation, and it emphasizes some things. I'm going to say a lot of things today, but what you just read is the meat of what we're talking about. Did I contract something while I'm away? Look at you all back there. You're keeping a good, safe distance. If you're at camp meeting, the preacher said most people wanted to be out of the spitting zone. I think it's safe to say you're out of the spitting zone today. I was reminded this morning why we do church, and I know we all have lots of good reasons. But at the last big potluck, we were discussing what would be next, and I was lobbying for the theme of desserts. But I come to church and find out it's salads. This is why we need church, because left to our own devices, some of us do stupid stuff some of the time. So I will bring carrot cake to the salad potluck. It's good to be back. I feel like I've been away for a long time, but in the peer schedule, I haven't missed a beat. We're just doing our regular schedule. I am continuing with our one-word sermon titles between now and Christmas of some real basic Christianity. But before we get fancy with our theology, we need to understand who we are in relation to God and who God is in relation to us. It's nice to be reminded of some of that. There's a lot of wireless stuff not working in this building this morning. Yeah, Nate's nodding his head. So I have my notes on a very small iPad. So I regret having a birthday this week because it means the print needs to get a little bit bigger. They say on the screen, put the font size half the size of the oldest person in your congregation. That's the rule for the screens. I want to talk about anxiety today, and I apologize if that gives any of you anxiety, because it might. But I'll explain as we're going what I'm trying to do here today. I remember the first time I was ever introduced to the term panic attack. I didn't know what it was. A friend of mine who did not live in England was returning to England for the first time in a while. And he boarded the airplane, stowed his luggage, put on his seatbelt, sat back to wait for peanuts, etc. And suddenly he had what was called a panic attack. He should have been excited to go back to his motherland, and he was, but he was going to be seeing his parents who had been at a safe distance for a while. And there were some unresolved issues there. Siblings that he'd grown up with under the same roof since leaving home, some had gone this way, he'd gone this way, and they hadn't really stayed in touch over the years. And his mind started going over what the next couple of weeks was going to be like, until he could no longer control his breathing. His breath started to get shallow, and he couldn't turn his mind off. And then add to that all the disruption that would be caused if he got off of the airplane, because why didn't he show up? Why didn't he stay on? And in the end, the panic attack got so acute, he had to leave the airplane and calm down and take another one later. When I heard this story, I was like, in my mind, using all of my pastoral expertise in the moment, why didn't he just stop thinking about it? And if you've never had a panic attack, you'll know what I just said. If you've had anything along those lines, you'll know that there's some things your brain cannot switch off. And the pressure of needing to switch it off only adds to the cycle of panic in the moment. So what happened to him? Why couldn't he switch it off? What was going on in him in that moment? A few years before that, I was speaking at a camp of tweens and teens, a summer camp, a good Adventist summer camp up in the hills, and good staff from our colleges, kids coming. We'd had a great time. It was over now. I'd finished my responsibilities. It was going to be great. It was just Saturday night left. My kids had come with me. They'd had a great time. Everything was good. All that was left was to hand out a few awards for the craziest person at camp, the tidiest cabin, all this stuff, and just have a good time with the campers. Everybody was in a good mood at this moment. I was going to be part of a skit. I was going to be brought up to the front, and I was going to be placed behind a screen, a reverse screen, with a light projecting on me and casting a silhouette of me. Now, back in those days, my silhouette was better than my silhouette today. I did not mind it. And I was going to sit there, and I was told that they were going to get a sword, and they were going to, behind the screen, ram the sword into me so that it looked like I was being killed by a sword. Sort of stuff that 12 to 14-year-olds love. When we got there, they lit up a chainsaw and just chopped me in half. It was hilarious. Everyone was having a great time. Now, earlier in the week, during one of my talks, I had stated, I don't like snakes. Never. If you ever find yourself giving the devotional pastoral talks at a summer camp, morning and evening, don't ever tell them what you don't like. I should have known this by now. At the first camp I ever spoke at, I got up in front of everybody and said, I don't like horses. There was a whole horse program at this camp, and I had to go for a horse ride. It's like a politician who'd said something bad on TV. I've now got to go do that thing. Had to ride a horse for the whole afternoon. That did not make me like horses. And now I'd stood up in front of everybody and said, I don't like snakes. And you know what? I don't. That's real. I've had plenty of chances to hang out with snakes. I have stared a spitting cobra in the eye. That's not something you should do. I had stepped over what I thought was a lizard in a crack of concrete, but as I stepped over, a green mamba withered away. A green mamba at that age could have had me dead in 5 to 6 minutes. They are on the top 10 most poisonous things in the world. I've met snakes. I've been in a house on the edge of the jungle when I was told not a very dangerous snake. You'd probably just get sick for a couple of weeks. Withered across the carpet in the house. I remember a lot of people jumping on couches and tables in that moment because there were about 15 of us in the house. And we didn't stop to see how poisonous the snake was going to be. We just went to higher ground. I don't like snakes. So as I was sitting in front of this screen getting chopped up by saws and spears, I caught out of the corner of my eye somebody taking 2 snakes out of a cloth sack. And I was suddenly not okay because I worked out what was going to happen next. Now, there is a difference between fear and a panic attack and anxiety. In that moment, I did not have a panic attack. I had fear. And fear, you can do something about. You may not always fix it. It might be too big of a thing for you, but Faced with fear, I was going to either fight or flight. And I decided I was going to do both. And I was going to do them loud, and I was going to do them fiercely, and everybody was going to know I did not want those snakes on me. Now, my handler, the person by the screen making sure I didn't run, tried to hold me back. But he worked out that this fear was real, and we should probably let the pastor go and put the snakes back in the sack. I tell kids everywhere, this is why you should never swear, so that when you do, people know you're serious. These poor people didn't know pastors knew certain words. They came up and they were expressed, and I did not want that snake on me. I was scared stiff. I have, I think, probably a little bit of a phobia of snakes. But this was not a panic attack. This was not anxiety. Anxiety faces often imagined things based on reality, but you start playing out things in your head about what is going to happen. So the thought of getting off the plane for my friend was frightening. Arriving back home, his mind started playing out what may or may not happen and assigning feelings and emotions to these things. So his chest tightens, his heart becomes acute, he feels every beat of his heart. And people around know there's something wrong and something has to change. So, what causes anxiety? Now, I'm going to dabble in this morning. And I use the word dabble carefully and intentionally because this is a risky thing to do. You probably know I am not a medical professional. I am not an expert on anxiety. I would not even deem myself competent on the subject. But I do think there is a spiritual element to anxiety. And as pastors, we have, I think with good cause, and this is a good thing, we have become aware that we don't offer medical advice. And in our zeal in the pulpit, sometimes we say things that actually hurt people medically and emotionally rather than be part of the healing. And so as the pendulum has swung, we have stopped talking about the spiritual aspects of anxiety. So we leave the topic to people coming at it from just one point of view, the medical point of view. And some of those people often see the essence of the problem, see spirituality as the essence of the problem rather than as a solution. So to lessen the risk of being what I will call a spiritual jerk this morning, because I've met spiritual jerks, who's like, just be like me, I know everything. I'm going to try and avoid that. But I'm going to list some things that I believe can cause anxiety, and I've done some reading on this in preparation. And some of them are not directly part of the spiritual equation, and I will identify those as we go. But anxiety does have a spiritual dimension to it. How we're getting along with ourselves, with others, and with God. If we waver from our chosen path, anxiety can become very real. So what are some of the things that can cause anxiety? Well, first of all, your family gene pool. Sometimes anxiety can happen for absolutely no other reason than you were born, where you were, when you were, to the people you were born to. You did nothing, but anxiety can show up. So I'm going to put a little asterisk by that one. If your anxiety comes from something like this, you might need someone to help you. This is something beyond a pastor's ability to really talk to. There are things going on that you don't know about, I don't know about, and will take a medical professional quite some time to also know about. And they may not figure it out either. Secondly, stress in your life can cause anxiety. Now, some people can handle stress and not feel anxiety. Other people will, and that has a lot to do with number one and some of the other ones coming on the list. Let me give an example here, one that I've lived a few times. I know some of you have too. When you move to a new town and everything's done differently, your doctor's not there anymore. Your dentist is not there anymore. Everybody says, oh, you just go to this place and do it. It's next to such and such. And I don't know what the next two places is. I'm not going to be able to find that. And you find yourself not really part of that conversation. So when Sandy came 17 years ago to a new marriage, to a new town, that's going to have some wonderful stress to it. But it's still some stress. Everything around you is different. Now, pastors, when we move to a new town, we have a little blessing, and that is there's usually a congregation waiting for us to help us connect with these things. When my sister moves to a new town, she's got to find all that. And so pastors, even though we often are known for moving a lot, while there is a stress to that, we see the best of the congregation in that moment. That someone disappears from your life, or a job entails things you feel completely unequipped to deal with. You start looking into the future and you don't know how to handle these issues, let alone a whole bunch of these issues all at the same time. Stress can cause anxiety in your mind to go into overdrive, and the solution does not feel apparent. Childhood experiences, we call these triggers later in life. Something can happen that can appear incredibly innocuous, a very normal thing, but it brings to your mind something that happened to you in your past. And it feels irrational, but your feeling in your body is letting you know that it's real. And so you start reliving stresses and anxious moments. This is definitely one a professional in the area can help with. Now, anybody willing to listen is your advocate here, and a pastor, a friend, someone who you trust, who listens to what's going on, can help here. But to get to the root of this sometimes takes someone who has some expertise in this area. And I'm not going to claim as a member of the clergy to be able to fix this sort of thing. I can listen. Your friends can listen, and that is of tremendous value. But there are some complexities there for sure. And coming up with healthy choices, what you eat and what you drink, having a potluck full of desserts can only add to your anxiety. It fits the category of it feels really good in the moment, but too much of that good turns into something unhealthy. This is why substance abuse is prevalent in our culture and has been throughout history, because you find something that feels good in the moment. So why wouldn't you participate? Self-medication. Hey, I feel better. Let's do this. But to keep on that often only increases the anxiety. Now, to add to that, to give up a substance that you've become dependent on also adds to your anxiety. And this is often where anxiety can just spiral up, and trying to fix it just increases that anxiety, and we get in this loop that's hard to get out of. Now, for something like this, I think AA has really got something. I've seen incredible things happen there because, number one, it's free. Your peers, you help and they help you, and community can be a really valuable thing to help you break some cycles. There are unhealthy people in some groups. You may have to identify that and go to a different group. That's for there. Same with church. Church can provide this. We often don't acknowledge problems in the same way as a group that meets to acknowledge problems. But I would like to think that church could help with something like this, to break some cycles, to be the support while you go down and hit rock bottom before you come up on the other side. Sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. It seems to be part of our life together. And finally, just your brain's wiring. Your hormones, pain, you have low levels of this, elevated levels of that. This can all mess with how you feel and cause anxiety and slam doors on healthy habits and what I would call health and hope. Now add a couple of these together and you have a recipe for anxiety, for moments that can take you down, where you might start behaving in ways you wouldn't normally choose to behave, but anxiety is beating you and you've lost control of it. I would like to think that a church, a community of faith, community of hope, would really help each other with anxiety, and I would certainly have stories of where that has happened. But I want to acknowledge here that sometimes a church environment with some of the pressures that come with that sometimes is the cause of that anxiety. When you're told to behave and be a certain way that doesn't fit with your truth or your reality, church can be part of that anxiety, and identifying that can be helped. It doesn't mean to give up on church. Your family might be part of the cause of your anxiety. That doesn't mean you give up on your family, but you learn maybe what's going on. Some of us have expectations that life will be a certain way. Some of us have a real lack of privacy in today's society that causes anxiety. A lot of us have a bunch of devices that were designed to make our life easier, but just adds layers of complexity to our existence. So with this, I'd like to bring, that last one is another one for experts to get involved in. But I'd like to bring up 3 areas of life that anxiety can show up in modern life. The area of marriages. It used to be that you would have a spouse plus a really good friend or two lived around the corner. Hopefully your mom and dad and siblings were not far away, and the classmates you went through school with just sort of were around to go through those same stages of life with you. That's what we call community. Sure, some of these people annoyed you, others were close to you, but they all in their own way supported you, were part of your existence. But in our wisdom these days, we've decided to send our kids off to academy at a quite young age. Some of those academy friends you make, you'll see again. Some of them you won't. Some of them you see every 10 years at reunions, maybe. But they often end up living in another state. Us Adventists really believe in sending our kids to an Adventist college. You know what happens there? Our kids marry people miles away. That's just a unfortunate byproduct of something we thought was really good. It doesn't just happen in Adventist circles. People will say, I want to go to a college away from home. So does somebody else who lives 4 states away. So you set up home far away from friends, far away from the people you grew up with, away from family. And now your spouse is your spouse, your best friend, your family members, your classmates, and nobody can fulfill that entire role. And we start putting things on each other that we can't handle. This is part of modern life. We have unwittingly set things up this way. When it came to our work, our careers, our jobs, a lot of us would work with one company for our whole working life, with one group of people. There were some weird ones in there, but we all knew them, and we all knew what they needed, and we just found ways to get along, and we got through life this way. We develop one skill and just sort of get better and better and better at it until someone says, "You've done your job now, you can go retire." But now we change jobs, we change towns again, lose our friends and support. There's a lot of people that change careers multiple times now through life. And this is adding to our stress levels, take away the support that we were accustomed to. And anxiety has a field day. It's real. No one designed it to be like this. Well, maybe one person I can think of, but we'll come to that part. Finally, retirement. This was something that was taken care of. Do your work, live a good life, enjoy your golden years. Now you have to figure out your own retirement. As pastors, our system created retirements. Lots of denominations did. But our leaders saw the stock market going up fast for a long time, and they're like, "Well, I want a piece of that." So now we have control of our retirement. For a lot of pastors, it's not a good thing. I'm not a financial expert. And by the time a lot of us figure out we need to look after our retirement, you know the first piece of advice you get? You should have started 20 years ago. Well, that's not helpful. That's what I would call anxiety-inducing. We have a lot to be anxious about. And a lot of people that parade themselves as solutions and help are just trying to get hold of your time, your money, and use you to their end, which just creates more and more anxiety. Now, this should come as no surprise to you, but I believe in a loving God who wants true, wonderful relationships with his creation. I really believe that that's true. We're separated right now. But the desire of the Creator is to be with his created. For real. I also believe in a very jealous devil and his agents who want to drive a wedge between God and his people. The first example of this is Adam and Eve in the garden when they ate the fruit. When God came looking and said, "Where are you?" and Adam and Eve hid, did they hide out of fear or did they hide out of anxiety? Now, it could possibly be fear. God had described, if you eat this, you will die. Was God coming to kill them now? That would induce some fear elements there. But I kind of think that the character of God did not make them think that first. I suspect Adam and Eve were anxious as to what God might say. God did ask, "Did you eat the fruit I told you not to eat?" Adam and Eve knew the answer to that before God asked the question. And this is when anxiety starts to build up. We know what we should have done, should do. But something has got in there and changed how we deal with some stuff. As they dealt with labor pains and an earth that fought back, I imagine Adam and Eve knew what anxiety was. It's not just a modern day life thing. We just find more and more ways to confuse ourselves. But Adam and Eve had one of their children kill another one of their children as a result of them eating the fruit. I think Adam and Eve knew what anxiety was. Depression, regret, when we look at our life, our beliefs, our reality, and looking at the advantages we have with the information we have to choose health, to choose kindness, to choose compassion, to choose forgiveness, when we believe that these are the things that bring communities together, that keep us safe in the arms of each other, and we know this and we believe this, but believing all of that is true, just for a moment, choose to whet our appetites and just dabble in the unhealthy, in the feeling good, in the spend now. We live this tension. We know what is right and true and noble and good, and we know we should think on these things. But we also know what temptation is. And we know what it's like in our own version to, just for a moment, reject that and do this. And I believe that that tension for a lot of us can cause anxiety. I know I should be here, but today I find myself here. Now, when I grew up, I was around a lot of kids that built their reputations on different things. There were some kids in my class that were really good at sport. And when they did something stupid in a soccer game, we let them have it because we were waiting for them to fail. There are other people that were good at friendships, at socialization. There were academics in our class. My identity, I hope this doesn't come as too much of a surprise to you, was the good kid who went to church, who volunteered for church stuff, who would get up in front and share. Now, if we were waiting for the sports person to fail, I knew there were people waiting for me to fail. So when I did, and I saw what was good and righteous and noble and pure, and I knew the right thing, but for a moment, just a moment, what about? This feels amazing. When that happened, my mind goes, what will they think? Will so-and-so still trust me to do this and that? How will people treat me if they knew this? This is where anxiety can get roots in you. You know the parable of the good seed? And there's a parable of the anxiety, where anxiety comes and sometimes it falls on the path and goes away, and sometimes it falls on the rock, sometimes on the weeds and gets choked, but sometimes anxiety falls on the good soil and takes root and grows and begins to have its way in you. So, with the introduction done, let's go to Scripture. And that was supposed to be done a little while before. I'm going to go to Matthew 15. I'm going to summarize Matthew 15. If you want to make sure I'm summarizing correctly, I invite you to follow along. I'm going to be doing a little bit of paraphrasing. And I'm going to Matthew 15 because I really want to go to Matthew 16. But Matthew 15 gives us a little bit of context to what's going on in Matthew 16. So Matthew 15, this is what's going on. It starts off with Jesus arguing with the Pharisees, and he ticks them off. I mean, really ticks them off. Jesus tells the Pharisees that their traditions won't save them. Now, I've been pastoring for 29 years. I have learned it is best not to tell a church that their traditions won't save them. Most people don't want to hear that. The things we hold near and dear. But Jesus didn't really stand on that sort of ceremony. So the disciples say to Jesus, cool it. You're offending the Pharisees. And I'm paraphrasing, but Jesus says something along the lines of, let them be offended. Jesus wasn't worried about that. This is also the chapter where Jesus says, it's not your traditions or what you eat that defiles you. It's what comes out of your heart that defiles you. So that rule about washing hands, dirty hands doesn't defile you. It's what you're choosing in here and expressing from there. This is also when Jesus calls a Gentile woman a dog. It would have been easier if he'd not done that. That doesn't seem like a Jesus thing to do. But it's worth noting in this part of Scripture, Matthew 15, that the Gentile woman does not seem anxious at Jesus calling her a dog. The anxious people in this story are the disciples, who are worried that the religious leaders are going to see their Jesus talking to this Gentile woman. That's where the anxiety is in this story. But this woman, this Gentile, she knows the solution to what she needs. Her daughter needs to be healed from demon possession. And she's standing in front of the one man she knows who can fix this. So if he wants to call her a dog, he can call her whatever he wants. Dogs get scraps from the table. Just need a scrap master. Please? And Jesus points to her as an example. Then Jesus feeds the 4,000, and Jesus shows again that with him you have no need to be anxious. Because Jesus, well, he's got this. You hungry? There's bread. So that's Matthew 15. Let's turn the page to Matthew 16. And Jesus starts unpacking what's gone on in 15 with the disciples. Jesus says to his disciples, don't fall for their long words and their religious superiority. Their religiousness will lead you to anxiety because you won't be able to fulfill what they're calling you to do. They are making up rules that protects their own power and influence, and it has nothing to do with truth. While Jesus is explaining all this, the disciples start arguing over bread. Who brought the bread? Who forgot the bread? Where are we going to get bread from? And Jesus is like, did you just forget about the feeding of 5,000? Did you forget about the feeding of the 4,000? Did you forget about the 12 baskets? Did you forget about the 7 baskets? Don't worry about food. You don't need to be anxious. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus will say, don't be anxious about what you eat or about what you're going to wear. It's so easy for God. And Jesus takes the disciples to Caesarea Philippi. I don't know if you know much about Caesarea Philippi, but if you exclude Jesus' trip to Egypt as an infant, this is the furthest Jesus traveled in his life and ministry. Not a lot of Pharisees in Caesarea Philippi. A lot of human sacrifices and some other really weird stuff. Jesus takes his disciples there, and he asks them the question, who do people say that I am? And all the disciples chime in. Some say you're John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. Jesus said, no, not what others say. Who do you say that I am? And Peter, who's often got an answer for everything, this time holds back and waits. It's not in his character to do that. But he says, Jesus, you are the Son of the living God. You are the Messiah. And Jesus says, you're right. Well done. And it's at this point, according to Matthew, that Jesus changes Peter's name from Simon to Peter. It's a good moment. And Jesus goes on with his teaching, and he starts talking about dying and suffering many terrible things. that the religious people, the leading Pharisees, the experts in religious law, would find a way to kill him. But after they killed him, he would rise on the third day. Now in verse 22, something incredible happens. When Jesus is teaching this, Peter pulls Jesus aside and says, careful what you're saying here, Jesus. These guys might take it the wrong way. You're kind of bringing the mood down. Now, if you ever find yourself in a position where you want to take God aside and say, God, you're doing it wrong, maybe the train has come off the tracks and you need to back up a little bit. But Peter's just been emboldened. He just got an answer right. Jesus just changed his name. Peter's the guy. Jesus, you need to cut that out. This is what happens to some of the people who walk closest to Jesus. The devil doesn't leave you alone. Jesus follows this up. I think, but what do we got? There we go. Verse 24. He starts getting really real with his disciples here at this point. And he says, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. There are some people I know maybe looking in the mirror, who when their potluck contribution fails, gets really worried. More than once, I have left for Bowdle Church at 7:30 in the morning. My brain doesn't work at 7:30 in the morning. And I get to Bowdle and I'm like, oh, I forgot my potluck stuff. Well, here, it's easy. I can go get what I forget. In Bowdle, that's not an option, and I start worrying about that. But there are people who have preceded me who have been burned at the stake for their beliefs, who do not have the anxiety I have for forgetting something for potluck. Those are the people who gave up their own way and in following God gave themselves wholly and completely to God. When you're trying to live with one foot in each camp, for a lot of people, this is where anxiety breeds. Now, I hope you heard me say sometimes it's your brain and your wiring, and there are some things where people are anxious because of just where they were born, who they were born to, with their genetics, etc. That is so true. And as a result of today's society, we are building that. But as your pastor, as a shepherd, I want to say to you and to me that there are times anxiety comes because we are not fully following God. We're got that tension there. Jesus goes on in verse 25. If you try and hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. Now, I got a year older this week. To some of you, I'm still young. To others, I'm getting on a bit. I've lived in various parts of this world in many different cultures, and I've tried my own ways on a number of things. And I can testify. I am a witness to this. Try and hang on to your own life, and anxiety will find its way into you and through you. You will think there are things in life that you can handle, and you will think that the only reason it's going wrong is because what someone else has done. So you end up blaming others, deceiving yourself, and telling God what he ought to do. These things are the root of anxiety. But Jesus says, when you hang on to your own life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for his sake, you will save your life. There's some real truth in there. There is. Amen. What benefit do you gain by pretending you're right all the time? By manipulating others to be that way? Jesus goes on to say in verse 26, what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? So many Christians so often say today, and I've heard us say it here, the world is getting worse and worse. There is so much evil. People are so far from God now. It's hard to argue with that. But the second we bit from the fruit, we were separated from God. Yes, we are far from God, and the devil is making it his business to destroy our support systems. And woe to us when we think we've found the answers to our problems in the world. You've seen the world try this. You've probably tried it yourself at some point. So what's the answer to life's anxieties? A pill? Maybe. I'm not going to discredit that. When medication helps you think better and clearer and helps you make healthy choices, I can see the advantages of that. But if you're taking medication to dull that process, it's not helping you. So if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, here's a pill for depression, but by the way, while you take this, make sure you eat well, exercise well, and sleep well. Use the advantage of medication to build those things into your life. That might be helpful. Being healthy. This is one reason why I love Seventh-day Adventist churches, because we put pretty high up our priority list that exercise is a spiritual activity. And I really believe that it is. Couch potatoes is the bedrock of anxiety. So eating well, exercising right. And I'm not just talking about being vegetarians. You know, the devil can show up in the details too. I'm talking health. That can help in the world of anxiety and emotions as well as your physical well-being. But anxiety is that thing in us that tells us that something is wrong. When something is hot and you touch it and you go, ouch, your body is telling you that's a danger. I think anxiety, now sometimes there's a medical thing going on, and I do want to make sure I've acknowledged that, because what I'm saying now has been abused and misused in the past. But it still remains true that anxiety can show up as a red warning light saying you're on the wrong path. And that to be free from this anxiety, the invitation still stands to give your life fully to God. So we get to Peter. In the message we just read now, Peter, we're starting to know a lot about Peter. Spent a lot of time with Jesus. Said a lot of stupid stuff, did a lot of stupid stuff. But boy, this guy could preach by the end of it. So when he gets to what we call first Peter, he starts telling us how we should live. And he calls us in this book to holy living. He starts talking to wives, and he starts talking to husbands. And there are things that wives and husbands should pay attention to that will help with anxiety down the road. Then he talks to all Christians and he says, this is in the second chapter, if you want to enjoy life, don't speak evil, don't tell lies. It's okay to search for peace. The eyes of God watches over those who do right. The ears of God listens for the prayers of his people. That is a wonderful, beautiful promise. To the disciples, he said, don't you remember the 12 baskets, the 7 baskets left over? To us, he's saying, my eyes are seeing everything. My ears are listening for your cry. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So live for God. Commit fully to him. Give your whole life to him. And then Peter says, yes, Christians will suffer. In this world, that is part of the deal. But in your suffering, you won't have anxiety. You won't be worried. You don't have to be scared. So he finishes with this verse. This is near the end of this letter. And he's talking to leaders. He's talking to, I think, young leaders, people who have not really become pastor leaders yet, but they're on that track. And Peter's like, just a couple things I want you to know. But I share this with all of us here today. He says, so humble yourselves under the mighty power of God. If I could say, stop trying to fix everything yourself. Humble yourself under the mighty power of God, and at the right time, because he knows everything, the future, the past, it all, he will lift you up in honor. And then, and everything I've said is just building up to this moment right now. Give all of your worries and cares. Give all of your anxiety to God, because he genuinely cares for you. And he will bring you through whatever it is you're going through right now. Let's praise God for that.